house. Come, my friends, let us worship together this morning and be glad.
As Alex and Dune Todak Schwartz come up to light our chalice, our symbol of faith, I invite those of you at home to light your own candle or chalice at home. And those of you here in the sanctuary, please rise in body or spirit as we speak aloud our affirmation. Please stay muted if you are on Zoom. And you'll find the words in the chat line or on the back of your order of service. Love is the doctrine of this church. The quest for truth is its sacrament, and service is its prayer. To dwell together in peace, to seek knowledge in freedom, to serve human need. For these high purposes do we unite in worship.
The chalice is lit in our hearts each time that we pray for vision, long for healing, forgive our enemies, comfort our neighbors, and prepare for justice's day. In its light, our hope and compassion are renewed, and the covenantal ties that bind each to all become clear. Now by its sacred flame, the path before us is brightened. Love prepares our way. Harmony is in view. There is no east or west, south or north. Only a world to greet and bless with more light still.
Please remain standing.
Oh, there's one there. Okay. Are we good on that?
You're going to announce it.
I encourage you either to follow the one you picked up, or if you didn't get one, ask a neighbor. Maybe you can make a new friend by asking to share with somebody sitting near you. This is a poem by the American writer and poet Joyce Rupp. I keep pulling it out, the old map of my inner path. I squint closely at it, trying to see some hidden road that maybe I missed. But there's nothing there now except some well-traveled paths. They have seen my footsteps often, held my laughter, caught my tears. I keep going over the old map, but now the roads lead nowhere. A meaningless wilderness whose life is dull and fragile. Toss away the old map, she says. You must be kidding, I reply. She looks at me with Sarah, that is doubting, eyes, and repeats, toss it away. It's of no use where you're going. I have to have a map, I cry, even if it takes me nowhere. I can't be without direction. But you are without direction. So why not let go? Be free. So there I am, tossing away the old map, sadly, fearfully, putting it behind me. Whatever will I do? Wails my security. Trust me, says my midlife soul. No map, no specific directions, no this way ahead or take a left. How will I know where to go? How will I find my way? No map. But then my midlife soul whispers, there was a time before maps when pilgrims traveled by the stars. It's time for the pilgrim in me to travel in the dark, to learn to read the stars that shine in my soul. I will walk deeper into the dark of my night. I will wait for the stars, trust their guidance, and let their light be enough for me. Some ministry from Joyce Rupp. So I decided to change up my approach to the sermon a bit this morning by working directly on today's reading, the poem Old Maps No Longer Work. Because frequently poetry can convey religious and spiritual wisdom far more effectively than can the analyses of theologians or philosophers. This poem is one such writing for me. Each time I come back to it, It reveals new truths about me and about the world around me. Its author, Joyce Rupp, is a contemporary Roman Catholic American writer, lecturer, and hospice volunteer. She comes from Des Moines, Iowa. My ideas about change expand every time I read or hear old maps no longer work. I've used it in many Circles of Trust workshops, as in the series we recently completed here at UUFD. I couldn't find the date when Rupp wrote this poem, but I've known it for at least a decade. As with most enduring art, the theme of this poem, that is, the author's call to let go of habits of the past which no longer serve us well in the present, is remarkably relevant to life here in 2023. Many sociologists, historians, psychologists, and others describe these post-COVID times as one of the most unsettled times in human history, an age of upheaval, to quote one sociologist, as humanity faces a confluence of challenges unlike any other period in human evolution. We're plagued by climate change. We're plagued by political conflicts between nuclear superpowers. We're plagued by fast-moving developments in artificial intelligence, gun violence, growing worse day by day. Just yesterday in Allen, Texas. At this point, 9 are dead, as I understand, or maybe 8 this morning. Joyce Rupp's poem calls us to consider the maps, that is, the habits, the ways of defining values, which may have worked for us in the past, but which no longer provide life-giving direction for the present and the future. So this morning, I want to invite you to consider how Rupp's call to think outside traditional boxes may apply to both your personal life and the life of this congregation. You may want to jot down notes on the copy of the poem on that pink sheet, which I handed out. Often, the basic act of writing down our thoughts helps us commit to turning thoughts into actions. So feel free to be reflecting through your pen or pencil during my reflections. So I first want to invite you to think about habits, activities, relationships, and more, which have guided your life in the past and helped you map out your future. Maps from the past are not categorically bad or categorically negative. Trust me, I'm a big proponent of having some forecast, some direction for where my life is going. And I really don't think the poet is saying that we should abandon every single map from the past, every single map we currently follow. But still, I also fully agree that many maps which work to advance human life in earlier times are no longer useful, no longer relevant, no longer life-sustaining for the present and especially to move into the future. As the poet wrote, sometimes those old maps lead nowhere except to a meaningless wilderness whose life is futile. Just consider events of this weekend in Great Britain, for example, as the maps for the coronation of a monarch last used 70 years ago were significantly adjusted and modified for this 21st century event. Or another example, a note I heard on the evening news a few days ago, that the old map of the culture of the Supreme Court not having ethical codes to abide by is a thing of the past. That map doesn't work for what we know today about today's activities among some of the justices, as just another example. Let's consider some of the functions and purposes of actual maps. Harrison had his map with him this morning. I think he must always carry that around with him in his back pocket. Let's clarify how metaphorical maps influence our lives by considering a bit actual maps. A map is a drawing of some part of the Earth's surface, which explains visual features such as rivers, lakes, forests, as well as invisible features such as county and state boundaries. Maps help us decide the best route for travel, and perhaps how much we can deviate from the most direct or efficient paths. Think then on similarities between actual and metaphorical maps, which have influenced your life direction. Perhaps teaching of moral and ethical values from your family or your teachers or your church. Perhaps perspectives on service in the world, which influence your field of study or fields of study and your career directions. Or perhaps think on social connections and friendships, which have drawn you to community activities, which have helped define your leisure time to nourish your soul and your spirit. Many maps in our lives. Our current life, the result of following many maps. Now, I expect most of us would not even consider relying on actual maps drawn before the interstate highway system was built to drive across the country today. In the same vein, are there earlier maps or practices or approaches to life decisions which no longer apply to your life in 2023? I expect the mental list of responses to this question is extensive if we pooled everybody's responses this morning. Just take your habits and attitudes toward the environment or toward the impact of white supremacy on human relationships, which you follow now, but which you may not even have been aware of 10 or 20 or more years ago. Or even shorten the time frame. Think on any of your beloved maps in social life, in your work in the environment, your modes of education, which you gave up as recently as March 2020, the start of the COVID pandemic. Maps which you haven't resumed. So many habits, so many maps which clearly we will never return to. New maps in education and work, which used to be only or largely only in person in brick and mortar settings. New social habits influenced by virus infections. In Unitarian Universalist life, so many stories about how the pandemic changed congregational life. Multi-platform is here to stay, my friends. Also, ways of building community other than Sunday morning corporate worship, bringing us together. Or rethinking what we mean by successful faith formation for children, youth, and adults. On and on. So much has changed in congregational life just in these past 4 or 5 years. Virtually all of my colleagues, my religious professional colleagues, agree church life will never go back. Never go back to what it was pre-pandemic. And that's a good thing. We have given up many maps, which even among us open liberal believers, maps which in the past perpetuated abuse, discrimination, and other oppressions, many of them implicit and unconscious on our part. We will never go back to what we were before the pandemic. Still, it's one thing to recognize old habits which don't take us anywhere. It's another to let go of them. That's right, huh? Letting go of old habits. I expect many of us experience a variety of feelings, reactions, maybe even resistance to the suggestion of giving up old ways of doing things. Have you ever been like the voice in the poem, shouting, "I have to have a map, even if it takes me nowhere"? Anybody ever sound like that? Perhaps old maps function somewhat like security blankets because there's a degree of comfort in the familiar. Giving up old maps, even if they lead only to a meaningless wilderness, represent change, and change can be challenging. change can generate anxiety, in part because the process of change usually moves us into a new state, a state of liminality. That is, that state of being in between, neither here nor there. Being liminal, being in a sense of disorientation. A liminal state exists, for example, during a rite of passage, such as our coming-of-age ceremonies in Unitarian Universalism, when we transition the adolescents from being children to being adults, and they're in that in-between stage. They're neither here nor there as they transition. They're in that liminal place. If anyone has dealt with teenagers who are in between, well, you probably have a sense of how disconcerting liminality can be. Letting go of old maps, letting go of childhood, moving into adulthood. We may feel like the trapeze artist, during that split second of letting go of one pair of hands before the acrobat has a chance to grab onto the next pair, that liminality about how will it work? Will I be safe? During any type of change, we hope we will land safely on the other side. The theme of change and how we respond to it, it seems to be all around us. It seems like we can't read a newspaper or listen to a news report without something about change. Such as a recent headline I read, "We don't know what will happen next." Its author suggests that the condition of change and upheaval is now more intense and more impactful than ever as our post-pandemic world goes forward, figuring out new values, new habits, new relationships. If you have experienced more anxiety these last whatever time frame, these last months, these last few years, even over one issue such as gun control, it's for good reason. We are living in anxious times. We might feel like we're cast adrift, adrift at sea during a thunderstorm without full control of how to steer the boat to a new harbor. Similarly, during this period of interim ministry, I've often spoken about change in congregational life, how this specialized type of change ministry can be anxiety-producing. The good news is that change is also a sign that we are alive, that we are moving in new directions. All living things change. Change is a sign of being alive. Some of you may recall recent conversations about a new UU book called Trusting Change by my colleague, Reverend Karen Herring. One of her vivid, tangible metaphors for change is that of the metamorphosis of a caterpillar into a butterfly, a change which she described as often being gooey. So this period of change can often feel like we are in goo. All the more so if we're not quite clear where the next harbor is and what it will take to get there. What it will take to arrive at a relationship such as with a new minister as this congregation is moving toward. During some changes in our lives, we may be tempted to return to our old maps, even if they take us nowhere. But backsliding doesn't really help us move forward. Last week, I attended the annual national retreat for UU interim ministers, where we talked a lot about ministry during these liminal times. How do we serve our people? We talked about. In one presentation, a former national UU president, the Reverend William Sinkford, who, by the way, is the colleague that our member Ken Carpenter refers to often. Reverend Sinkford was one of the visitors to our conference last week, and he expressed concerns about how attendance in UU congregations hasn't returned to pre-pandemic levels yet. He also expressed concern over budgeting. In many congregations, budgeting is particularly tight. Maybe some of you can relate to that, given recent conversations here. Full-time ministries are becoming less and less common. And also, some congregations are seriously facing the threat of closing. Things have changed since the pandemic. Certainly a cause for anxiety. Certainly a time to assess the old maps which shaped this denomination since its founding in 1961. Reverend Sinkford calls for new maps for congregations to offer welcome to visitors and find possibilities for expanding church life in this multicultural, multiracial, multi-religious world of the 21st century. In another retreat session, my interim colleague and point person for search, whom many of you are going to get to know very well, the Reverend Keith Cron, offered his perspective on these liminal times by reminding us that the pandemic triggered many situations, such as the Great Resignation, during which many had no choice but to let go of many of the old maps, many of the old professions, many of the old careers. In Unitarian Universalist life, the same. We've had to let go of many of our habits. But letting go isn't all negative. Letting go opens up new possibilities, new opportunities to subscribe to new ways of experiencing the world, new paradigms for reaching out to newcomers in our communities who are hungry for a community grounded on the values of this liberal faith, my friends. But perhaps some of us are still wondering how to find faith and hope through this process of letting go, especially for faith and hope in a future which still may feel vaguely defined. You may still be wondering, like the poet said, how will I know where to go? How will I find my way? The poet reassures us that we can find safety as we negotiate the liminal spaces of change, to find new, more current maps, more fitting of current realities. She calls us to a wider view, to new maps, which she says may be revealed through the stars. Tools of navigation for countless voyagers for many centuries. Perhaps we can trust the stars, which, for my interpretation, the poet is suggesting that these stars represent trust and faith. Think of the trust required of early explorers who crossed the oceans guided primarily by the stars. Think of the trust that must have required. Think of the potential for humanity if trust became the guiding principle for survival of this planet, for survival of plant and animal life as well as Mother Earth. Or just imagine the American political culture, or environmental advocacy, or moral and ethical standards which respect individual human rights and freedom. Just imagine the new maps we could draw if trust and cooperation are the basic operating principles, the basic stars we follow, the new maps for access to health and happiness on this planet. Here in Unitarian Universalism, think of the potential if our guiding stars are values which lead to abundance, justice-making, and joy, to quote Reverend Sinkford. And in the spirit of our new proposed Article 2 for this denomination, if our guiding star indeed is love as the centering value, which we are proposing to vote on at the next General Assembly. Think of the potential of this congregation as you follow the stars of ministerial search, leading you into new locations on the maps of Unitarian Universalism, some of which you never explored using your old maps. Think of the potential in new maps to expand your discerning of who you are and how you travel into the future. My friends, may we all continue to grow in trust in a future defined and shaped by love. So to believe that beloved community is possible right here, right now, on all the current and future maps of life we choose to follow. May we all be grounded and joined together in beloved community. May all this, my friends, be so.